Hey, it's Kisha here with Defending the Early Years podcast. We'll be focusing on amplifying the voices of early childhood educators, advocates, and all of those who love children.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Today, I bring to you a wonderful friend from way across the pond, and it is the lovely, the wonderful, the extraordinary Trisha Dean, all the way from Queensland, Australia. Hi, Trisha.
Hi, Kisha.
Oh my goodness. I am just so happy and excited to hear your voice and to chat with you and to share with everybody just your total awesomeness. It's been a long time and there's been a lot going on in your journey. I want to give everybody the opportunity to just learn what I have learned from you. You guys, Trisha is a long time lover of children, a ECE, I call extraordinaire, who has done everything from worked in the classroom all the way up to guide a wonderful group of educators. And I invited Trisha here today to tell us a little bit about herself, her work, her passions, and what drives her unique point of view. I mean, it's unique for me here in the US. It's very much aligns with the philosophy that I hold near and dear to my heart. But I just can't wait for you guys to hear the story of Trisha. So Trisha, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what drives you and what keeps you going with such passion and gusto with children?
Yeah, sure. So I started my ECE journey about 24 years ago. When I started, I was literally just looking for a job because my son had grown up and I had been a stay-at-home mum. And I decided just to give this early childhood thing a go. And in the back of my head was, if it doesn't work, I can just leave and go and find something else. And very quickly, I realized that I had found where I was supposed to be. And I fell in love with my work with young children right away. Um, I spent quite a few years doing a little bit of bouncing around because there was just some stuff that wasn't sitting really well with me in terms of how people were working with children and the routine and the regimen. I couldn't really put my finger on what it was. And eventually I started realizing what was going on for me, and I just realized that we needed to make a better way of working with young children. And so I did what I said I would never do, and I took on a leadership role and became a director of a service, and began to be able to start making some change. And the more the more I researched and the more I worked with children, the more I was able just to facilitate a different way of being with children. And I really just found that space, I guess, for myself. And my biggest drive is just making a world for young children where they're seen and recognized as people in this world at a particular stage in their life. And I'm a big advocate for agency and play and just allowing children to grow up and live.
hmm And when you talked about just not things not feeling right in your gut and just knowing that something was off, that was something that I always felt as well, working with young children at the very beginning. And my original solution was I'll just close my classroom door and do what I know feels right. That was
Yeah.
my initial solution. And that soon wasn't enough. So it started escalating to like, okay, well, maybe I should stand up at the staff meeting and advocate for example, like forced snaps. Like, why do we have to do forced snaps if this child is not falling asleep and they are, getting in trouble because they're moving or because they're noisy?
Mm,
Why are we not finding a different way? Um,
yeah.
that was tough for me in the traditional early childhood world in the US because we're very much do what we've always done. Do you find the same thing in Australia? Is it kind of like, um, we follow the same patterns that we've always followed without kind of questioning the why, or even letting the field evolve at all?
Oh, absolutely. And, when I talked about taking on that leadership role, one of the biggest reasons why I did is because I couldn't find somewhere to work where they would actually allow me to try and do things differently with children. Like it was just like, no, this is the way we do it. That's not right. You can't do that. And so, taking on that leadership role and finding a space where I could actually oversee that change happening and advocate with a group of staff. Um, as the leader, I found that there was probably somebody out there in the world that would have allowed me to, have a little bit more autonomy in how I worked, but I couldn't find them. So, so I just took it myself.
Mhm. And I hear that a lot. When I'm traveling or talking to other educators, I hear a lot about it's not that early educators don't have that same feeling that we had, it's that they're not able to let their voice be heard.
Yeah, yeah,
And a lot of times they end up either opening their own program like I did, or finding a way to get in a administrative position or some form of leadership where their voice is counted.
yeah.
um, so how long into your career before you said, okay, enough with this? I need to make I need to move to a position where I can actually make these changes. How long did that take?
I think it was like between 5 and 6 years.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so you became director,
Yep.
and what was your, like, what was the shift? What were the things that you made changes almost immediately? Like, what was it that you were like, this um this is top priority?
Yep. So one of the very first things for me was opening the doors to outside.
Yes.
Um, it was just like this whole thing about, groups of, up to 24 children in a room just being shut in for 6 or even 7 hours a
Mm,
day, like being shut inside. And so one of my very first things was just like, let's get these doors open and let these children out. Like they need to be outside. And that's very obvious, when we see those children that can't just sit still and can't um, concentrate on these indoor activities. And while I didn't really know at that time, I didn't have the research and stuff or access to research that would back me up. There was just something in me that knew these children just need to be outside. And we did a lot of work with the staff team and with the families, just going back to our own childhoods and thinking about like what our childhoods were like, what the things were that we remembered most about our childhoods, and the things that we treasured about our childhoods.
tapping into that is so
Yeah,
important, because I think if you come from a place of um connection, a place from that memory, it seems like as we get older it starts to slip, right? You don't
yeah.
feel the same feelings, so every once in a while you might hear a song or smell a smell. I think I've heard some people say, like, the smell of crayons or play-doh or glue brings them back to, even more close to my heart, like the sound of trickling water from creeks, or
Mm,
the smell of fresh cut grass, like those types of smells that bring us back to that space, um, are so important, because as we age, we forget what
we do.
childhood is like. And
Yeah,
one of the first things that I found that works is to get people to go back to that space. So,
yeah,
a challenge, I would think, and what I've experienced in my work is coming into contact with adults who have worked with children in a more regimented way, a more indoors way, a less autonomous, on the side of the child way, and having them shift their mindset.
yeah.
So, what did that journey look like for you when it came to working with a team of people who may have been used to doing it a completely different way?
Yeah, so we undertook quite a fair bit of action research based work. So that was, that was just like building pictures of, what we remembered from our childhood, and then building a picture and I guess the values and images and what we imagined and what the families imagined, what it was that they wanted most for their children. So, just thinking and talking to parents and saying, what do you want your child's childhood to look like? What do you want for them when they grow up? What do you want them to be able to remember about their childhood? And I think those things and just getting people in touch with that really raw sense of, is it really important, for a 3-year-old to start recognizing letters, or is it important for that 3-year-old to start by having, joy in their life and
Mhm.
discovery and things that actually light them up rather than fill them up.
Yes, I love that line. Light them up rather than fill them up. I love
Yeah.
it. And that is an interesting and necessary step to take, pulling the parents in, especially if you're joining a program that's already existing. I think I've
Mm,
seen the mistake of not bringing the educators and the families along on the journey with you as you make the change, um, and not getting that buy-in and that sense of collaboration and working towards a same goal.
mm,
And I've seen situations where there's lots and lots of pushback because they are not um, involved or included. So that's really a great point and an important part. I know a lot of the folks listening are in the position that you and I both have been in, where we're working somewhere and we're just not feeling aligned, or where we
mm.
are taking on a leadership role and we need to get this message across to a lot of different people so that changes can start happening. So once you
Yeah.
got your parents involved and the families involved, the staff involved, even the children involved, what did that look like? What was that next step? How did the actual change? You opened the door and then what?
So it was hard. So it was a lot harder than just opening the door. Um, And I think I had a little bit of misconception at first because it was just like, okay, so we want children, people's memories and what they want for their children is to have that time in natural spaces outside and to be running and free and, climbing and swinging and all these things that people were thinking about childhood and that they remembered. So I thought it was just as easy as opening the door, and it wasn't. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think, and we pulled back a little bit because what I did find was that the group of staff, even though they, in theory, were way on board with this stuff and they kind of saw it and understood it, when we just opened the doors up, there was this great feeling, I think, of loss of control. Um, this was a group of people that had been used to, I guess, planning and being in control of pretty much every moment of children's days. And all of a sudden, we were just asking them to open the doors up and let these children run and be free.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, very hard for people to kind of let go of that control. And I think the misconception also that they had of the role that they need to play in children's lives, like they had this role that I need to be the educator and the teacher and the person that's teaching these children things. And I can't do that when they're just running off on their own and doing what they're doing. So um, the biggest thing I think I learned from that was just pull it back a little bit. And so we just started and we said, okay, let's open the doors for an hour every day, and let the children flow between inside and outside and be where they want to be, do what they want to do. And then it was about working, I guess, with that team of staff and making sure that they were really closely observing children, not necessarily interacting with, but they were very closely observing children and observing what they were doing and where they were going and where they were playing. Um, and I feel like probably around that same time was when some of the early brain research stuff really started coming into our spaces. Um, Probably in a bit of a trickling way at that time. And so then we started thinking about, what children's brains and what their developmental needs were at the stage they were at. And that was probably a little bit of the game changer when people could actually put it wasn't just this vision thing anymore about, oh, this would be really lovely if we do that. This is what there is research coming out about what children actually need. And when we work in a way where we're controlling children, not giving them agency, not giving them freedom to choose or to do the things that their body's screaming out for them to do, we're actually hindering their learning and development rather than aiding it.
Yes, that concrete research definitely propels the work for sure.
It
It
does,
helps us
yeah.
amplify what we already know and what we've observed. But what it does when you have a group who are shifting is they can match what they see and witness to what research says. So,
Yeah.
having that to look back at. And I find the best tool for any new or shifting educator who's shifting their mindset, the best tool is really observing, just
Yes.
really stepping back, like you said, not necessarily involved or engaged or shifting or altering the play at all, but stepping back outside of what I call the bubble and watching and
Mm,
observing. And for me, writing things down, taking notes, and
yeah.
writing down exactly what I see has always been magical for me, because then I go back later and read it, and I can, like, it's almost like seeing outside of yourself, like stepping outside of something and watching it from over top. I can see it without any biases, without any of my own input, because you're human. So when you're watching, some of your own thoughts and inputs and wonderings are in there, which are great and good
Yeah.
and help inform us. But there's also just the purity of what you actually see. And I love going back and
Mm,
reading what I saw. And it just is so, I don't know, such a drive for me. Like, I'm really passionate
yeah.
about seeing what children do, what they're thinking, how they might engage with a material or an experience a second time or a third time, or like that pattern of that process and that pattern of development is so fascinating to me. So,
Yeah.
allowing the teachers to have that hour where they can just dedicate themselves to that, I think
Yeah.
is genius, because you're right. It is scary and a huge chunk to bite off to just switch,
Yes. Yeah.
just open those, and not just for the adults but for the kids too. Just
Yep.
to suddenly have this power or this freedom that you don't know what to do with. And I experience that when new children come to my program, and I love watching that process of them
Yeah.
looking around, seeing the other children, and they're like, "Oh, he's painting his arm. Oh, I can do that." And like looking at the child and then looking at me to gauge, like, okay, is this allowed? Or the first week or two or three, even, where they're kind of like waiting for somebody to tell them what to do and where to go,
Yeah.
and observing the other
Yeah.
children. And then at some point it shifts for them where they realize, I can listen to my own inner voice, and I love to see in the child that shift when they start to take on their own actions and their own ideas and contribute to the ideas of others. It's just
Yeah.
beautiful. So to allow that time for the educators to experience that in ways that are tangible and digestible for them is
Yeah.
a good reframe.
Yeah, it sure is. I'm
And
just
so
I
uh
sorry.
I'm so sorry. I was going to ask you, so when they did this 1 hour observation, this 1 hour open the doors observation time, was there a were they taking notes? Was there a process of coming back together and reflecting upon that in a community?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like the notes on the observations and stuff, but another tool that we found really, really useful was just doing and the educators didn't so much as what I did, but I would just go out and see things happening and video, maybe just 5 minutes or
Mhm.
whatever. And then we would bring that together as a team and sit down and watch, like a 5 minute video of play, and then we just really unpack it, so that even the educators that maybe couldn't sort of start seeing that for themselves, when they could bounce off one another and reflect and put ideas in there, it was them then thinking about, what was going on for this child. And as we know, it could have been vastly different from what was actually going on, but it did get them to start actually thinking and seeing that children can direct their own learning and experiences, and actually realize that, even when we set up an environment, and that was the other big thing that we did, was get rid of the whole notion of providing activities for children and
Mhm.
really put a focus on providing environments. So, environments that just had really open ended things in there. Because one of the things that we observed is, an educator might have set up a space with some thoughts in mind about how that space might have been utilized or what it might have given children. And then when we watched children just go to that on their own with no educator saying to them, this is what I would like you to do here, or, this is what these materials are for. Most of the time, the children did something completely different with the spaces than what the educators had envisaged them doing. And so that was then about the great realization of the way that children are able to direct their own learning to things that are relevant and important to them.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think once you see it, you can't unsee
You can't.
it. Yeah, it's like once you take the time to really observe and see that and have those beautiful discussions, it's just this glue that binds you. Um, so that being said, the children had this eventually evolved to an indoor outdoor sense of freedom, that
Yeah.
ability to go in and out, which by the way is very important to the discovery philosophy. And what I that the indoor outdoor is huge. The ability to do what you want and what your body needs within both of those spaces is even more huge. And that was when, for me, I started to see less of the typical misbehaviors that you see in traditional programs. I didn't
Oh,
see
yeah.
the issues around transitions. I didn't see as much I guess physical like not rough and tumble, but like physically hurting each other.
Yeah.
I didn't see those type of behaviors as I did before. I didn't
Yeah.
see behaviors where adults are trying to get children to complete a task that they didn't want to complete and then pushing back. It just disappeared. And that was across infants all the way up. So some of the
Yeah.
behaviors that we always attributed to development, which are still true, but they were so amplified in that over uber structured environment that was so far from what is natural for them. So
Yeah.
as you guys expanded that concept of agency and really listening to and seeing children, what other ways did that show itself within your program?
Yeah. As you talked about, like that behavioral stuff was huge. And we noticed that fairly early on in the journey, because, there had been, children that educators had maybe done, behavior plans for and things like that. And all of a sudden it was just like, well, actually, like, what's happened to these things that we were seeing children do? Like, they're actually not doing those things anymore, and they're actually, we're not bashing our heads up against a wall trying to dissipate behaviors. And then we reflected and really delved into that space as well. And we probably kind of went from, educators just constantly throughout the day putting out fires and redirecting and, trying all these different methods of um, keeping children engaged and calm and stuff. And what we actually found was, like, all of that stuff we didn't need very much at all. Obviously, there were still times when things happened that we needed to um, put our adult lens on and take in and have discussions with children and things like that. But the behaviors that we had previously seen changed so much, and we just all of a sudden found that our spaces were calm. And people would walk in and they would say, oh, how many children do you have in your service here? And we would say, well, we've got like 63 children here. And they're like, where are 63 children? And it's like, well, they're here, but they're all out there and engaged. And it was just so beautiful, just continuing to watch that journey. And we just, every year, we pretty much sat in a different space of action research. And that's probably a big thing that I would advocate for, is like, think about what it is that you're thinking about with your team and turn it into a little bit of a research project, but do it over a really long time. Like, and I think most of our action research projects probably went for a good portion of 12 months. And so, we would have different little things that we were doing. So, in the very first place, it was just like one of our research things that went on for months and months and months was just like, what happens when we stop saying no? Like, that was our question.
Mm-hmm.
So when we stop saying no to children, like, no, you can't climb up that tree, or no, you can't um, go on the slide backwards, or you can't climb up the slide, or no, you can't pick up sticks and play with them. So it was kind of like, what happens when children ask us to do something or they just start doing it. And before we say no, stop, we stop and think ourselves and go, okay, is this child or are these children in imminent danger? Is this too much of a hazard for them? So, it was like identifying that stuff of what's the difference between a risk and a hazard. So, it was just, before you say no, stop and think, do I have to say no right now? Or can I just keep watching for a little bit longer and see how this plays out? Or do I just need to throw a question at these children? Like, they might have balanced a plank up against something and we could see that it was really wobbly. So instead of just going up and saying, no, you can't put that there, that's not safe, going up and saying, oh, I'm a little bit worried. I've been watching you from over there and I can see that that plank's quite wobbly, and I'm a little bit concerned if you start climbing on it, that it might wobble a little bit too much and it won't be safe for you. And then seeing what children did with that. And when we take that kind of approach with children, like, we watched them kind of stop and think and then go, oh, okay, let me have a look at a little bit more. And on their own, then they would just, kind of check that out. So, when we started doing that stuff, and we would see, and we just called it the wobble test, and we would see children all over the place when they were carting stuff around and leaning it up and stuff, they would do a little bit of a wobble test and go, is it steady or is it not? And we didn't really put that in place, and I don't think the children ever knew we called it the wobble test. We just called that on our own in our own space. But but we just watched these children start learning how to think about those little bits of a risk.
Mm-hmm.
And when we saw something that made us gasp, we just told children, like, oh, that's really worrying me. What do you think about that? And let them have a little bit of a consideration.
Mhm. And that's funny because the language at our program is stable. They're always saying, "Oh, is that stable? Oh, this is very stable. Look, this is very stable." And I guess it
Yeah.
was just something modeled that they picked up. But over the years with different groups in different locations, so I clearly must use the word stable because
Yeah.
over the years, it's something that is picked up and the children communicate about it. And I'll observe them building together, and one child may ask another child to test if it's stable, or do they think it's stable, or I'll watch a child build something and then put a foot on it, wiggle it a little bit before climbing on. So that trust that we pass on to them, they then have for themselves and for their peers, and it's just this ripple effect of trust and
Mm.
wondering and testing out their own assessment of safety. um, One thing that you mentioned was the the question or the research, the action research, and that too I think is a really important tool to use when moving a group's mindset from one place to another, because
Mm.
it's this process, like everything's a process, and allowing the teachers to take ownership over those ideas of and really experiencing it. Well, what does happen when
Yeah.
we allow children to eat when they're hungry? Let's see. Because
Mm.
at the start of it, you might ask them, why can't we do this? And I've been in situations where the adults can tell you pages and pages of reasons why it absolutely will not work to let children eat whenever they want. So sometimes I do that first. Like, why will this not work? And I want to hear what they think the speed bumps are. Like, what
Yeah.
gets in the way, and then break that down to start talking about solutions for those speed bumps. Like, oh well, if they ate whenever they wanted to, what if they run out of their food? Well, okay, let's go to the solutions column. What can a solution be? Well, we could have a basket of extra food. Oh, okay, check, that's fixed. So that it's not they're not getting a sense of dread that comes over someone when they really deeply feel like something won't work. You can kind
Hmm.
of comb them through those challenges, because there are real challenges with some of these concepts as when it
Yeah.
comes to groups of children. So I love the idea of taking it and stretching it over a long period of time so that the process that's happening has a chance to really be explored. So that's a
Mm.
good tip, because I
Yeah.
know even myself, and like I know that we have seen it, so it's hard to unsee. But when you get to a group of educators who haven't seen it, sometimes we want to go fast and we want it
Yeah.
right now because we know it's great for kids. But I think it's a good tip to allow that process to unfold.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to I'm going to fast forward because I really
Yeah.
one aspect of your program that I fell so deeply in love with, and um couldn't figure out how to get around some of our licensing regulations, like real licensing regulations. Because I had to look. I was
Yes.
like, is this
Yep.
something that has, those passed down regulations that aren't really real, but they've been like arbitrarily set up? I had to
Yeah.
look and figure out, okay, how can this work in the US? And this was back when I was in a program that had multiple classrooms in a big center. Um, and it was your I mean, fast forward, I'm sure this took you lots of time to get to this point, but it was when you
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
in the full free flow. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looked like when you got to the point where you were able to fully open the center across the board?
Yeah, so when once we got to the stage where we were fully free flowing, so children were playing inside and outside. So we had three classrooms that were age grouped, um, and they all shared one playground. And so once the doors were open and children were going outside, obviously they were a complete mixed age group. Initially, in the beginning, it was, when children were playing inside, they played in their own room. Um, and we were doing some research at one point in time, and we came across probably a service that was about half of the size of ours and really just, one space. And they were talking about, or actually, I think they had 2 rooms, sorry. And they talked about how they had made their 2 rooms. I think it was all just kindergarten children, but they had made their 2 rooms completely different so that they could make bigger, richer spaces inside. Because, what we potentially see when we have our separate classrooms is there's so much duplication of spaces that happen within those classrooms. Everybody wants to have like a block area or a building area for the children. Everybody wants to have an art space. And, so all of these things are trying to happen within a very limited room. And so these 2 kindergarten classrooms had kind of come together where they didn't duplicate within the 2 rooms and the children could kind of access the space that they wanted to. And so, their block area was bigger and better with more resources, and their art area was bigger with more resources. And, um, you know, potentially that with everything. And so we were trying to work out how we could maybe do that. So we started, talking about doing that with our rooms. And as we were doing that, one of the first things that we did was we just created one library space within one of our rooms. And we just watched as children would come in and use that library space. So instead of every room just having a little book corner and the main storage of our books being out of the children's spaces and, this swapping over of books and resources, we brought all of our books and we bought new bookshelves and we put every single book that we owned in the centre, which was a lot, into this library space, and a couple of couches and some pillows and, everything that we could think of just to make a really comfortable space for children. What our image was of, and even talking with the children as well, they were always involved in making the spaces. But what this image of a space where children could sit and read, and so we created that library space. And then, we were obviously watching children of all ages coming in and using that space together, and the interactions that we would see between the older children and the younger children, um, were probably amplified to what we were seeing happen in the playground outside. And so we just continued doing that throughout the service, and we just built spaces. And eventually, our service was just like one great big open space, where all children could just flow in and out of any room all day, every day. And we watched, the older children becoming like the big siblings, and we watched siblings actually spending their lives together, growing up together instead of separated by rooms and doors and fences and stuff. And that was probably one of the big things as well, is like not keeping children apart that should be together all day. um, these children that belong to the same family and they're separated, and sometimes you go, oh, like you can go for a visit with your sister,
Yeah.
for 10 minutes or something, and then you come back. So, we just saw this happening, and we watched the older children helping the younger children with their lunch boxes at meal times because they were all just sitting together. And our role as educators, changed again. Like it was like we needed to do less again. And some people were then a little bit concerned about the older children. Well, like, are we putting too much on them? What about their play? And so then we did a lot of, reflection into that space about how these older children were learning so much on their own. Like if they were helping younger children do stuff, they were cementing their own knowledge and understanding of something, and usually growing it. It's like, when we talk about things with other people and we try and help other people understand, it actually only enhances our own understanding. And sometimes even myself, I know, like I can talk about this way of working with children, and even in those moments where I'm talking with somebody else, I might have this big aha
Hmm.
for myself, like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize I was doing this. Like I was doing this with children and I could see that it was benefiting. But now that I'm telling you about it, I'm actually understanding it better. And
Yeah.
I'm having to actually put some, um, some reasoning and understanding behind that, not just saying, well, this is what's best. I have to actually tell you why it's best. And so in those moments, I'm actually just making that stronger for myself. And so these children were doing the same thing. So the older children were doing the same thing, and the younger children are obviously benefiting. And we saw, what we felt was a level of calm in our service move to a whole different level, like, because it was just all of a sudden it was just like this one big family. And so we stopped talking about our space as a center, and we talked about it as a home away from home. And we were just like, like, when we say we want to provide a home like environment, that's what we want to do. Like, we're not just putting homage to words in saying like our environment looks homely. Like, we want this to be a home. And so our little catchphrase that we ended up with then was like, we all came into the center living life together. So adults, children, families coming in, volunteers coming in, grandparents, whatever. Like, we're a big family and we're just coming here to live life for the day. And lots of learning is happening for these children in the throng of that. But essentially what's happening is we're coming to live life. And then,
Yes.
I get throwbacks from staff saying, oh yeah, but like all these jobs we have to do and these cleaning. I said, so you don't clean your house?
Yeah. Yep. That's part of living life.
You know what? Like, you don't clean in your house? And they're like, well, of course I clean in my house. And I'm like, and you clean here?
Yep. This is home too.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I love that. I can attest 100% that when children are free to make those choices and to move amongst spaces that are intentionally designed for them, there is a sense of calm, it's this beautiful sense of empowerment and freedom and agency. And it's just, I mean, it's breathtaking to me. I love
Yeah.
watching it. So I want to thank you so much for your work. I want to thank you for the challenge of shifting minds and being an example. Thank you so much, Trisha. And I'm so happy you came here to talk to us. I'm sure the listeners have so many more questions. So I'll probably have you on again because I have so many more things that I want to hear and say and want you to share. But thank you so much for being here. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Kisha. Bye.
Bye.
And that was another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Defending the Early Years works to support the rights and needs of young children nationally. Learn more at DEY.org. Pay us a visit, sign up for our newsletter, or connect with us on social media. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.